It's the 8th of January 1937 in the Foreign Legation Quarter of Old Beijing, and Pamela Werner is riding to her death.
She was probably bludgeoned to death.
Her internal organs were removed.
There's considerable debate about who killed Pamela Werner and why.
He must almost instantly have realized that what he looked at was his dead daughter.
More than 80 years later, historian Lars Ulrich Thom hosts a monthly walking tour tracing her final hours.
When you have a murder, it ignites such interest that you can make people care about a narrative during Beijing, during the 1930s, that they would not else have a relation to.
Pamela Werner was a Russian Jewish orphan who grew up in Beijing. She was adopted by Edward Werner, who'd spend the rest of his life trying to solve his daughter's murder. The former British diplomat's correspondence was found by author Paul French, who wrote a best-selling book that's pretty much become the accepted interpretation of events. Pamela's father thought his daughter and others had been lured that night to a party by a group of men.
They wished to use these women for sex. When Pamela realised what was happening, something went wrong.
I could see, well, it's a popular book, it's most enjoyable to read, it made for a good story. But from a policing perspective, it didn't make sense to me.
It was somewhere around here, is that right, that she was found?
Yes, she was found just the other side of this city wall.
Former British policeman Graham Shepherd had his own dive into the archives and has now written a rival book about the murder.
I think the strong likelihood is that it was a former Chinese school friend of Pamela's by the name of Han Chao-ching.
But Paul French is dismissive of the student killer theory.
To assume that a 19-year-old or teenage student who was dating her would suddenly decide to murder her seems to me, frankly, just bizarre.
Graham Shepherd's interest in the case was sparked by an ancestor's involvement. His wife's grandfather was in charge of the failed inquest, and her family was angry at how he was portrayed in Paul French's book. Paul French says this means Graham Shepherd is not an impartial investigator. But Graham Shepherd says Paul French's book relies too heavily on the letters of a grieving father. So, there you have it. Dueling authors, pens drawn, different killers. I guess this complicated historical showdown could well be coming to a literary festival near you. In the meantime, the mystery continues, with plenty of others developing their own theories of a murder which will almost certainly never be solved. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.